This is going to be a brief presentation based upon the chapter Marketing and Advertising. And what we want to discuss just a wee bit is not only the characteristic features that you would expect to find in an advertisement, for example, but perhaps we can discuss just a little bit the ethics of advertising based upon a previous presentation that we participated in within the past few previous weeks. And I'd like you to perhaps at least silently think to yourself, why do we buy? What is it that compels us to consume? And of course, I'd like to point out that this is a slightly iconoclastic way of approaching a subject like this, but coming up here on what is otherwise called Black Friday, the company Adbusters is celebrating Buy Nothing Day, in which, of course, as you might be able to infer, the basic gist of the message is that we should not consume. The overall idea is to give our government and the corporate world a message, an idea that perhaps in order to be who we are and have an identity, we don't necessarily have to go on buying sprees at specific times, almost on cue. Remember, Black Friday, referring to that Friday after Thanksgiving, is one of those times when it's possible that the greatest amount of income a store, an entrepreneur, will experience. So I think it's important to consider whether or not that is necessarily a good thing, or perhaps if neither good nor bad, there's some other kind of activity we might want to consider, particularly at what is often regarded as a somewhat, perhaps erroneously at times, one might argue, sacred time, or at least a day where we can sort of meditate, or a weekend during which we can maybe try to appreciate what it is that life is about, what it means to be a happy person. Classic philosophical questions, particularly stemming from people such as Plato and Aristotle, but also from many, many time-honored religions as well. What does it mean to be happy? Do you have to consume to be happy? But again, I don't want this to become simply a personal preaching moment, so let's move on. I'd like to initiate our discussion today with a little tidbit, and hopefully it will work okay, from YouTube, done by a gentleman who seems to me to have quite a lot of wisdom to impart about the nature of junk food and advertising it.
We do not really have a free economic system, not the way that you've been taught that it's free. It's really controlled by very few individuals, very few corporations, and what they have in mind is a strategy for extracting the maximum profits from consumers that they can legally get away with.
Okay, listen up, men. There are over 50 million teens out there. Now what can we make and get them to buy?
It's just really hard right now because I'm trying to find my own place with my buddy, and it's just hard to save up money, and I can't open up a bank account, so it's kind of hard to save money without a bank account. Just stressed out, basically stressed out with money.
Humans today are actually being exploited to generate profits. It's much the same thing, and people are kept unaware of the truth in order to motivate them to continue playing that role of an ignorant consumer.
We could increase the caffeine in the coffee we sold them.
Well, the energy drinks we came up with are doing well. Maybe we could create a line of energy pizzas. We'll throw on more spices and call them herbal supplements. Too costly. What more can we do with tap water and high fructose corn syrup?
Just for the money?
It's all about the cash, of course. Think they care about you, or they care about money?
I'd love to think they care about me.
You're wrong.
We could be a healthier, happier nation right now if things were more fair. If corporations really cared about ethics and actually helping people be healthier, we could be living in an abundant society where more and more people could be wealthy and healthy at the same time.
Well, I don't know what you think about that. Perhaps somewhat biased little tidbit, but I hope that would get you to think just a little bit about how it is that food that, technically speaking, is not necessarily nutritional, and in some instances arguably bad for particularly teenagers, but certainly probably any of us that consume quite a bit of junk food. Think about the ethics of that. Think about what it is that you should be considering as a critical thinker and somebody who applies moral principles in a logical fashion. What should your response be? And I'm not saying, of course, that anybody should be, quote unquote, always agreeing on what the response should be, but just think about it. Whatever action you end up undertaking in your own life, simply think about it a bit. Now we move on to another little episode called the 12 Kinds of Ads, and we're going to go through this and let this at least give you a couple of these notions about the kinds of ads there are out there, and perhaps you can also do a little bit of reflection in your own life and see whether or not you encounter a couple of these ads periodically yourself. And I think it's a relatively recent production, although it appears to me that it might be using somewhat dated commercials, but it probably quite as relevant anyway, and would be so for at least the next several years, unless something radically shifts in the way in which marketers develop their ads to try to influence our buying. This is a Samsonite commercial.
Samsonite spinners. 4 wheels, 0 effort. Samsonite. Travel made easy.
Now this is done by a gentleman named Gunn, and he calls this, of course, the demo, and it's a visual demonstration of a product's capabilities. You probably see many of these kinds of things. There was a gentleman that was quite famous for a period of time in advertising just a variety of little objects and items and appliances. Billy Mays passed away relatively recently, I'm sorry to say. But in any case, he was quite popular, and he's still showcased doing demos of products. And, of course, several others, often on late-night TV and on cable, of course. It might be true that a kitchen knife will help you, and stain removers will help you. They are indeed demos. The question is, to what extent are they edited? Let's go do a couple of more of these, and I would encourage you to take a look at the actual website at some point in time. We'll move on to the next one. This one is showing the need for a problem, and then to some extent providing a solution to that. Well, let's go on to another one, since that one was there yesterday, but it doesn't appear to be here today. Here is another one employing some kind of symbol analogy or exaggerated graphic to represent a problem. So, of course, you can see that Theraflu is going to be a cure for the ill of really not necessarily fitting in too terribly well with the rest of the human populace, because you are such a grotesque entity. And, of course, it's metaphoric for how you feel inside. Admittedly, probably to some extent, has a certain amount of metaphorical or informational even meaning to the casual viewer. I just really feel like that gargoyle-like individual when I have the flu, and, of course, Theraflu is going to help you. Other products that are referenced here are things like Levitra. As far as I know, Levitra is a pill for erectile dysfunction. And, if, of course, you've got that problem as a man, many men do, it may affect your ability to be able to do things like throw a football through a hoop, or basketball through a hoop, or a football through some kind of a suspended target, but probably not. But it's very interesting the degree to which these problems are created, constructed, enhanced by computer graphics, and then we are sort of left believing that somehow the problem we have is maybe so serious that only a very special kind of chemical blend or cocktail is going to help us. Let's do another one. This one is called the comparison. This is a very interesting one, but what you end up doing is comparing your product and show how it's superior to the product or products of the competitors. Let's see how this goes.
So I was talking with my broker the other day. It was the usual small talk, you know. How's the kids, how's the family, all that. And then it dawned on me. When you think about all the years I've been paying those big commissions on everything we've bought and sold, were we really discussing my kid's future or his kid's future?
Once again, it turns out that on comparison, good old Charles Schwab will do a much better job of helping you with your many investments and your savings. Here's another one. This is called the exemplary story, and these get extremely creative, but because they are a narrative, they provide a narrative illustrating what a product can actually do for you. And you'll be happy once you use a product based upon this narrative. Let's take a look at this one.
Who cried? I did.
Not me. It was a sad ending and everything. I didn't cry.
With your hand in your chin.
That's called concentrating on the moment.
It's more like holding your quivering upper lip. Exactly.
I wasn't crying, okay? I mean, seriously, I don't know why.
See, that's a nice little narrative story in which it ends up that Volkswagen Jetta is such a safe automobile that even those people are casually chatting and perhaps not paying as much attention as a driver ought to actually the duty that he is undertaking there, driving everybody else and presumably driving in such a fashion as to be careful and protect them. Gets so distracted that perhaps gets into an accident or isn't reacting. But aside from that, that may not really be the issue, because you could be an extremely safe driver and still get nailed by somebody else who's not paying attention. Either way, it ends up that that little narrative, as is described here in this little sidebar, could be a gripping one, getting your attention, making you perhaps much more likely to consider just the possibility of Well, we have to skip that one and go on to the seventh one. This one is going to be known as a presenter testimonial, or A tells B. This can take the form of a kindly neighbor, who allows another person some really important wisdom, shares his or her wisdom with that other individual. Gosh, when that happened to me, I used to do this.
Delivery intercept. Well, say you've shipped your new gizmos to all your best customers, and they're just about to arrive when Bob comes in and says, "Stop the gizmos, there's a problem with the gizmos." Well, if you shipped with UPS, you'd have the control to stop those gizmos and bring them right back. It's not just delivery, it's UPS Delivery Intercept. Whew, that was close.
So this one actually is a classic case of a kind of a testimonial where a person who has been hired to be a presenter, a credible presenter, will give a story about how well the product will serve you. And of course, amongst them, this one appears to be relatively rational. But remember, this, like so many other advertisements, has its true impact in terms of the production values that go into it, how well scripted it is, how well rehearsed it is. And that's one of the things that you kind of have to, as a critical thinker, looking at advertising and marketing, and anything actually, you have to be very much aware of the elements, that components that go into play when somebody is presenting you in this format, video format. The idea that you should be purchasing a specific product. This one is called the ongoing characters and celebrities, and of course, in this particular case, I'm sure that many people have seen the good old Geico cavemen that continue to parade themselves through many of the commercials, and you can almost identify with them as if it were a kind of a drama, ongoing drama or sitcom. So ongoing or recurring characters and celebrities that continue to, once again, portray the product in the appropriate light.
Why does that bother you?
Why does it bother me? So easy a caveman can do it?
Well, it's just a commercial.
Okay. Well, what if it said Geico.com, so easy a therapist can do it?
Well, that commercial wouldn't make sense to me.
Why not?
Well, therapists
are what? Smart? My mother's calling. I'll put it on speaker.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Well, I think that those are absolutely hilarious and extremely well done. But nevertheless, you know, it's a kind of ad that is identifiable. I'm sure that you've seen many such ads over time. And the ones that we've thus far tried to depict, you've probably seen them represented in many ways throughout your experience watching the tube. This one is called the symbol analogy or exaggerated graphic, and it demonstrates the benefit of the product. And I think for the sake of time, we're going to let this be the last one, but I invite you to go to the website www.slate.com and check out the rest of them. Let's take a look at this one.
Every day for thousands of years, Old Faithful has been, well, faithful. You'd almost set your watch by it.
What causes it to stay so regular?
Stay regular with Metamucil Daily Fiber Therapy. It works with you, naturally.
We just can't say.
Get regular, stay regular. The natural way. Now available in powder, wafers, and capsules.
Well, now you see how that might be just ever so slightly exaggerated, given the fact that Metamucil presumably is supposed to help you with your bowel situation, and comparing that to Old Faithful, well, it does appear to be a kind of an exaggerated analogy, and thus far, I think what we've seen are basically versions of the rhetorical devices that have been discussed. All right, so we've seen a few of the 12 kinds of ads. Let's take a look at what marketing is in a consumer culture. Marketing a product or service is an essential component of doing business in a consumer culture, particularly like that of the United States and other quote-unquote first world and becoming first world nations. The success of a business, of course, depends upon its ability to determine what customers want, and of course they have to do marketing research in order to find that out, and then provide it at a reasonable cost, whatever that may mean. And I think that that is a very difficult quantity to arrive at. To achieve these goals, businesses need a plan and need to implement effective strategies for marketing and advertising. And that's, of course, what you and I, every day of our lives practically, from waking to sleeping, if we're in the car, listening to the radio, looking at billboards along the 405, we see it all the time. And of course, a business has to identify target markets, customer hot buttons, through its own, and somewhat, I might add, rigorous and scientific marketing research. Now, I thought I would include at this point in time, since I'm trying to just put ever so slight a bit of emphasis on the ethics of consumption, another video I offer for your meditation and perusal.
As noble as we say in the polls, are we truly willing to sacrifice for the higher cause, or is it simply someone else's responsibility? Is there any truth in the saying that consumers may profess to be social radicals in surveys, but are most definitely economic conservatives at the checkout counter? It is the common man and woman that we bring to the fore in this documentary. Watch and listen as individuals map out their own logic and beliefs about ethical conflicts, as wide-ranging as the seemingly innocuous day-to-day purchasing of bath soaps, to their reactions to the labor practices of major brand manufacturers such as Nike, to the supposedly victimless crime of purchasing counterfeit goods.
Prefiero pagar menos por eso porque no creo que me esté dando mucho más You can talk about ethics when you have everything in front of you.
Saving the world isn't worth more than about 3 cents a week, I'm sorry.
I think we kind of rely on the government to draw the lines.
What might be terrible to us is just, hey, these blokes are lucky to have a job.
Todos lo sabemos, pero a la hora de comprar, todos compramos.
Moralism stops at the pocket.
Comfortable to पैसा कमाने के लिए that is business.
Tüketicileri bence önemsizse kendi memleketindeki olaylar önemser.
Tú personalmente, pues sí, puedes decir, no compro nada. Pero claro, ¿quién te garantiza que lo que compras no sea porque lo están explotando?
Clearly, we, as individuals, are not as noble as we say in the polls. We might care about the environment, but we will continue to get into the SUV until the petrol prices demand a change in behavior.
We're all exploited one way or another every day of our lives, and I think it's improving the standard of living.
So, of course, that little video is to some extent about knowing that people perhaps are treated in substandard conditions and scenarios without respect for their own individual dignity, being paid below minimum wage in an environment which is actually detrimental to human vitality and flourishing. And although we know that about certain kinds of products, and I'll not name any specifically, but often they have to do with athletic wear products. Often this issue has to do with athletic wear products. We still continue to buy, because when it comes time on Black Friday coming up here to purchase something, why, by gosh, we may know or suspect strongly that some company might be guilty of not treating its employees fairly, or again, according to, let us say, something like a standard of morality, and yet we'll buy the product. And of course, if we don't know about that, well, I suppose we can't be ridiculed too heavily from a moral point of view, if you will, or judged too harshly. But still, it seems like we do have some responsibility for trying to find out the source of our products, in much the same way as we try to find out the source of what we eat. Now, skipping back to marketing per se, and this is just something that probably many of you are somewhat more familiar with than I would be, since I clearly am simply presenting this from a layperson's point of view. There are approaches to marketing research, such as surveys, observation, and experimentation. Survey collects information and opinions about a product. Observation monitors consumer buying patterns. That can happen at the checkout counter with great regularity, by the way. Experimentation measures cause and effect relationships between product purchases and selected variables, such as packaging, logo, or price. And of course, the experimentation was done for a period of time, as has been pointed out previously, with subliminal advertising. Relevant information through marketing research is gathered, and then what a company does is get involved in strategic planning. And then, of course, that plan becomes a method by which an organization deploys its resources to try to accomplish a goal or an objective. So this is one of the reasons why when you hear strategic model, it basically boils down to a systematic list of policies that will guide the future specification of inputs, output, processes, and values of the complete operations of the business of the corporation. That really probably is one of those things that you put into a business plan, depending upon what kind of a business you're endeavoring to construct or implement. This is a very interesting acronym, I think, that is worth remembering with respect to this particular subject matter. SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This model is used, as it said here, for developing new marketing strategies, as well as by businesses and individuals for making major life decisions. So, really, if you try to put this in a context, I suppose, of consequences with respect to making an ethical judgment, you probably are looking at something like all of the options, all of the contrary evidence against what you want to do, if there is one. What are the unintended consequences? I mean, you can put that into a kind of a critical thinking format, and I think if you add ethical principles to SWOT, perhaps something like SWOT, S-W-O-T-E, in other words, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and ethical considerations, maybe you have a more complete picture about a good model, seems to me, a commendable model that could be utilized when a company is developing a specific product and trying to figure out who the target audience is, and indeed how to purvey that product. We looked at advertising in a couple of the classes that I teach previously to try to determine the presence of informal fallacies and rhetorical devices, and I think everybody got the point that most of the advertising can be subjected to critical scrutiny, critical thinking scrutiny, and the result can be that you can assess that there are many informal fallacies, such as appeal to popularity, to some extent appeal to fear, appeal to celebrity status, appeal to pity. Many of these, and sometimes you find one or more in one advertisement, but you can find multiple ones in an advertisement. Why do we advertise? So that people can become aware of the product, to inform people, and to motivate people. And in fact, to create demand, you could add here, because that is one of the things I think that it is argued is missing from what is called classical economics, that marketing and advertising actually can help to create demand. And what you as a consumer, using critical thinking, and I probably ought to do, is to use our critical thinking skills in order to determine whether or not we really need something, and whether or not that demand has been a kind of an illusion that has been created. We have to realize that in critical thinking and philosophy, we look for the truth. Advertising isn't interested in that. And I'm not saying it should be, mind you, but it's just important to realize that if somebody's trying to market a product to you, they're probably not concerned that much about the truth of what they say, although there is such a thing as truth in advertising. There are clever ways that you can manipulate that concept in order to be able to, in some respects, convince a buyer, consumer, to acquire something that maybe is not quite what it is touted as being in the ads and the commercials. Product placement involves embedding advertisements or targeted products within television shows, films. Now, a classic case of that, of course, was with that sci-fi movie called Transformers, where a couple of years ago they planted that Camaro that was really, when it transformed, Bumblebee, if I recall correctly. Beautiful car, the Camaro, and I wondered myself, I think it was about 2.5, 3 years ago when the first Transformers came out, as of the time of my making this presentation. I wondered why GMC didn't get right on it and go ahead and start shipping that car out. But apparently it was a concept car. Of course, we've had Transformers Now Part 2, where you see that Camaro figuring prominently, and right around the time, if I recall correctly, that they're about to put that movie into the cinema, the car was being advertised, and finally it had been put into production. Again, it's nice that many GM products were featured in that movie. You can kind of take a look at some of the other movies out there, including things like Terminator. You might see a lot of Chevys, or perhaps Fords, or another model. What I notice is, interesting enough, that when anybody's using a computer in a theater, in a movie, you can kind of tell it's almost invariably a Macintosh computer. I find that really an interesting trend. But that's called product placement. Thing that has some ethical and moral overtones to it has to do with this proposition here. Research shows that children under the age of 8 lack the cognitive maturity to recognize either the intent of advertising or the fallacious reasoning, that is to say, rhetorical devices, that are frequently used in ads. And of course, these problems may persist throughout the teenage years. And once again, when you undertake the exercise of just trying to determine why it is that you should buy something, how it is you're being marketed to, what you think maybe the intent of the marketer is, which we're pretty clear on that. Probably not to make life better, probably to make maybe somebody's life better, but not everybody's. That is to say, the people who are going to make a lot of money because you buy their product, their life might well become better. Yours might not necessarily. But of course, that's the way in which we advertise the products, and children are unable to discern the difference sometimes between what's good for them, what's good for them, and what's good for the people that are marketing the product. Things I think important to remember when you're evaluating advertisements is, again, to bear in mind, generally speaking, all of the rhetorical devices, informal fallacies that ever come into play. Scare tactics, take a look and see to what extent rhetorical devices are used to persuade us as opposed to logic. How about credible evidence? Is that current in the ad? How about the conformity, tendency for human beings to conform? Is the ad or advertisement appealing to the inclination of a person being marketed to want to belong to a peer group? Does the ad set up a desirable image or lifestyle that maybe have nothing to do with the product? You see that in cigarette commercials. Alcohol, it seems to me, typically. Somehow a cigarette commercial can be associated, as it often was, with cigarette commercials of old. Maybe being on horseback, maybe being out in the wilderness, maybe enjoying that wonderful nature air. And of course, it seems like a cigarette is the very last thing you'd want to have under those circumstances. Although I feel a little differently about a good cigar, but that's my bias. Does the ad employ other informal fallacies, hasty generalization, stereotyping? Does an ad use primarily emotive language and images that actually are meant to be evocative, or maybe euphemisms, that is to say, words that are utilized in order to display only the good or emphasize the good and not recognize the reality associated with the product itself? How about the grammar? Remember we talked about amphiboly before? Is that there? So all of the things that we've been discussing really can come into play when you evaluate an advertisement. Try to ask yourself the questions in addition to this, based upon those criteria. Is the language vague? Are claims exaggerated? Does the ad omit necessary information that, if you had it, would make you feel differently about the product? If there's an analogy, is the analogy really good? Remember, we discussed analogies as inductive arguments, and they're only so good as the analogates are. If there are statistics, are the statistics credible, and do you understand where they came from and how you're supposed to interpret them? You can conclude from this, typically, that advertising influences a great deal of our buying habits, and maybe we need it to some extent. But you also need to be vigilant in using critical thinking skills in order to identify and evaluate the messages that are redolent in advertising. Now, this is a little movie that I'd like you to take a look at. The whole idea about trying to be a consumer and live in the 21st century world has pretty much spread in a global way to a lot of countries and a lot of societies throughout the world, many different cultures, all of whom pretty much are plugged into satellite TV. Many people, I think, would want to buy, but really, they just don't have the money. So let's take a look at what's going on here in this epic.
This is a typical construction site in India. Construction in India is a very labor-intensive process in which workers put in long hours doing difficult manual work. In this video, we provide a description of working and living conditions of these workers. Importantly, we try to understand the relationship between freedom and consumption in the lives of these workers. Modern societies place considerable emphasis on human freedom. Consumption is another significant aspect of contemporary existence. Theorists such as Russell Belk and George Reitzer have argued that consumption plays an important role in defining individuals. Zygmunt Bauman and James Twitchell have further observed a close association between consumption and freedom. It is argued that in this period of late capitalism of postmodernity, consumption is increasingly defining human freedom. In this video, we critically examine this relationship between consumption and freedom. This video is shot in the city of Kanpur in northern part of India. Specifically, we conducted this research at a construction site in slums of workers in a major university in the city. Living conditions of these workers are very similar to their working conditions. They live in shanty slums around their workplaces. These are extremely wretched conditions of filth and squalor, as is evident here. Specifically, when we moved into these houses in which workers were living, abject poverty of their existence was obvious. As it can be seen in this case, these workers have minimal possessions. This is Amit, and he makes his living by working on the construction site. Amit's possessions are confined to some clothes, dishes for cooking, and some food items. Food, clothing, and shelter can be described as three basic necessities for human survival. Here, we are referring to survival purely at a biological level. It can be seen here that workers driven by abject poverty survive on very limited food. These workers told us that they struggle to make their two ends meet. Having freedom of choice in terms of cleaner and better quality food is dependent on money that these workers do not possess.
अच्छा इस पे बारिश के समय वो बना है वो जो हाँ हरी रकम अच्छा अच्छा वो अच्छा उसके अंदर अंदर सोने का जो है हाँ
Clothing is another arena in which destitution gets reflected. Most of the workers possess only one or two sets of clothes. Amit is describing that he has two sets of clothes. One set he wears to his work and he keeps another set for wearing when he goes out visiting his friends or local market. It can be seen that the set he is wearing is already torn and needs repair. Looking at their living conditions, we were curious to elicit from these workers their response to the idea of buying a product like television. As Baudrillard has argued, television has its sign value beyond use value for this group. It is an important object of differentiation here. We found many of the workers completely dismissive of the idea. For some of these workers, the very question about possessing a television was rather an insensitive one.
तो इच्छा नहीं होती है टीवी भी देखने की
कभी देखते नहीं है तो क्या इच्छा होगी टीवी देखने की
अच्छा और घूमने की
अपने यही तसला तो होते हैं
अच्छा लगता है टीवी देखना
In order to transcend these limitations, some of these workers made an attempt to procure the symbols available in the marketplace in the form of consumption objects. However, these attempts have led to only a very limited success. This is an ironical illustration of Berlin's description of lack of positive freedom.
अच्छा आप जो बोले अच्छा नहीं लगता है क्यों ऐसा क्यों
देखिए एक बैकग्राउंड होता है
जी
कि मतलब हमारे ये रिश्तेदार हैं और इनके पास इतना है
जी
तो और संस्थान में आईआईटी जैसे संस्थान में होकर हम लोग कुछ नहीं कर पा रहे हैं इसका मेन
टीवी अगर था तो आपको कैसा लगता है अभी बताइए आपको कैसा लगता है टीवी
Despite these abysmal living conditions, most of these workers demonstrated only a limited understanding of the system which continuously exploits them. For many, this was a God-ordained reality, a reality of their lack of freedom.
Well, that should be a fairly powerful statement, and I hope that you'll go back and try to review that video. There are many of such examples of nations that are trying to become first world nations completely, in which people are being exploited. People want, of course, to have the kinds of things that are advertised now globally, like TV sets, and it's not up to me or probably any one of us to suggest that a person doesn't need one. The individual sort of has to make that particular judgment on his or her own. But when you talk about consumption and you talk about human happiness, it seems like the two tend to go together, and even World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, I believe, does include as one of the elements in ascertaining quality of life how much income per capita is accessible or enjoyed, and consequently money does clearly factor in, as Aristotle would have said, a moderate amount of money, not an excess. So if you don't have enough money, it might affect your overall sense of well-being. But at the other end, of course, we know examples that are just quite the opposite of what we just saw, where many people luxuriate in abundance. So part of the problem, of course, is they're trying to adjust to the fact that maybe a person just simply cannot really afford to lead a certain kind of lifestyle, and yet the message consistently, in not only our culture, but now I think spread throughout the world, is you've got to conspicuously consume. Very great sociologist, philosopher type, coined the term conspicuous consumption, Thorsten Veblen. It can be defined as the public enjoyment of possessions that are known to be costly, and I think we kind of saw that in a sort of impoverished way in that movie. So the one's ability to pay for such things is flaunted. That is to say, you're really showing off the fact that you have a lot if you happen to be a conspicuous consumer. It can also be defined as a term used to describe the lavish spending on goods and services acquired mainly for the purpose of displaying your income, your wealth status, and of course in the mind of a conspicuous consumer, such a display serves as a means of attaining or maintaining social status. You probably have heard the expression keeping up with the Joneses. Well, that is actually a kind of a fun, common sense way of saying we want to try to make sure that if our neighbor has an RV or a neighbor has a nice new picket fence or they've managed to purchase something like a big screen TV, well, we can go out and do the same ourselves. Almost seems like a vicious circle or cycle that a person can get involved in, the buying cycle. We're definitely going to see a lot of that, I think, coming up here during the holiday season. This should be my last offering here.
When I sit and watch TV, I see how great my life could be. It never quite occurs to me that this is not reality. The advertisements never fail to hit my fancy on the nail. They send me letters in the mail, invite me to the latest sale. I need things less. I want them more. Without them, life would be a bore. I grab my purse, head for the door. I make my rounds from store to store. So since my one and only purpose lies within my latest purchase, I won't have to sit and cry, 'cause there's so much that I can buy.
Well, that seems like a gem out of the past, doesn't it? Hard to say when that was filmed, but it looks like somewhere around the 70s, I suspect, based upon what was being featured on that TV set. Could have been maybe even late 60s for all I can tell. But in any case, it seems to me the message is pretty clear, and of course this might even be an example of an exaggeration about our consumption. But clearly, the idea that perhaps we spend just a little bit too much of our time on how to spend our money might be one of those criticisms and critiques of our current situation. It's not for me to make an assertion or judgment about the overall state of economic affairs in particularly the United States of America, or for that matter, the Golden State of California. But my guess is that what could happen here is that if we approached what we buy with greater critical thinking and carefully evaluated what it is that we actually need, what it is that we actually want, and balance that out with respect to the kinds of advertising that we get to stimulate and motivate us to purchase, almost like a herd, particularly with the upcoming Black Friday, perhaps we come to a conclusion about what we are and what we ought to be and how we can live that would be a little bit more sustainable. Anyway, that's kind of a Thanksgiving message I'd like to leave you with. The last thing to mention here is the Buy Nothing Day, once again, on the 27th of November. Nobody is trying to cajole you into just staying at home and doing nothing, but, you know, for many of you that might look kind of attractive, particularly if you have been experiencing a furlough. This is one alternative, by the way. Just stop buying. Don't buy as much as you used to. You really can't afford it anyway. That's what I like to say. Thank you for joining me, and I hope at least you found some of this, even if you don't agree with some of the things that seem to be implied here, at least a little bit stimulating. I hope it is somehow dressing to be served up with your Thanksgiving meal. Take good care.